Robert Duvall sat down next to an elderly woman on a bench in rural Virginia and didn't tell her his name. She talked for 20 minutes without asking. When she finally stood up to leave, she said one thing that stopped him completely, and that he wrote down in his notebook before he drove home. It was a Thursday afternoon in June 2006, and Robert Duvall was in Washington, Virginia, a town of about 200 people in Rappahannock County, 40 minutes from his farm, picking up a few things from the hardware store on Main Street. It was the kind of errand that takes 20 minutes at most, the kind of afternoon that doesn't announce itself as anything other than ordinary, and that occasionally becomes something else entirely without warning. He had been living on the farm in Rappahannock County for years by then, had bought the land in the early 90s when he wanted something that was entirely outside the industry, a place where the work was physical and the days were structured by weather and season rather than call sheets and production schedules. He knew the people in Washington, Virginia, the way a man knows people in a small town when he has lived near it for a decade and a half, not intimately, but with the comfortable recognition of regular presence. The hardware store owner knew him as the man from the farm on Route 622. The woman at the market knew his order. Nobody much cared about the films. He had finished at the hardware store and was sitting on the bench outside it in the June afternoon sun, in no particular hurry, watching the slow traffic on Main Street and enjoying the specific quality of a summer afternoon in rural Virginia that has no demands on it. He was wearing a plain work shirt and old trousers, the clothes of a man who has been doing things around a farm and has not changed before coming into town. He was not wearing sunglasses. He was not trying to be invisible. He was simply sitting on a bench outside a hardware store in a small town on a Thursday afternoon, which was entirely sufficient. The woman sat down beside him at 3:20. She was in her early 80s, small and upright, with the particular posture of a woman who had been told to sit up straight at some point in her youth and had never stopped. White hair, neatly arranged, a cotton dress in a small floral print, a canvas bag on her lap that suggested she had also been running errands. She settled onto the bench with the deliberate care of someone whose joints require a moment of negotiation before committing to a seated position, a process she conducted without self-consciousness, the way people conduct things they have long since made their peace with, and then looked out at Main Street with an expression of complete contentment. Not the performed contentment of someone who wants to appear at ease, but the real kind, the kind that comes from a person who has been sitting on benches in small towns for 82 years and has found, without trying, that they suit her. She did not look at Duvall. She did not appear to be aware of Duvall. Then, without turning her head, she said, "Lovely afternoon." "Yes, ma'am," Duvall said. "I always stop here on Thursdays," she said, still looking at the street. "After the market, give my feet a rest before the drive home." She paused. "My daughter says I shouldn't be driving anymore. I tell her the day I stop driving myself to the market is the day I become a passenger in my own life, and I'm not ready for that." Duvall looked at her. "How far is the drive?" he asked. 11 miles, she said. "Same road I've driven for 53 years. I think I can manage 11 miles. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She had grown up 3 miles from where she currently lived, had married Harold Marsh at 21 in the same church where her parents had married, and had spent 61 years in Rappahannock County acquiring the specific, unhurried knowledge of a place that only comes from never having left it by choice. She knew which roads flooded in March and which farms had changed hands in the last decade, and what the county had looked like before the interstate changed the traffic patterns in ways that nobody who arrived after 1975 would understand. She was, in the specific way of people who have been somewhere long enough to know it completely, entirely at home in the world she occupied. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 82 years old, had lived in Rappahannock County her entire life, had been widowed 7 years earlier when her husband Harold died of a heart attack in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in November, and had been running her own errands and driving her own 11 miles every Thursday since. She told Duvall these things not in the confessional way of someone unburdening themselves to a stranger, but in the matter-of-fact way of someone describing the basic geography of a life that she found, on the whole, satisfactory. Duvall listened. He asked questions about Harold, about the farm, about what Rappahannock County had been like when she was raising children there in the 60s and 70s, about the church she attended, and whether the congregation had changed over the years, about the market, and whether the same families still ran the stalls they had always run. Each question produced an answer that generated a new question, not because Duvall was working to keep the conversation going, but because Eleanor Marsh turned out to be one of those people whose knowledge of their own life, when given the chance to express itself, produces more material than the time available can contain. He asked questions about Harold, about the farm, about Rappahannock County in the 50s when she had been young there, about what had changed and what hadn't. Eleanor Marsh answered each question with the directness of someone who has lived long enough to know that most questions worth asking deserve a real answer. At some point in the middle of the conversation, she turned and looked at him properly for the first time. "You look familiar," she said. "I have one of those faces," Duvall said. She studied him for a moment with the frank, unself-conscious attention of a woman past the age of social pretense. "No," she said. "It's not that. You look like someone who has been looked at a great deal and has decided not to let it change anything about him." She paused. "That's a specific thing. Not everyone manages it." Duvall looked at her. He had been looked at in a great many ways over the course of a long career, with recognition, with admiration, with the particular blankness of people who can't place a face they know they should place. And he had developed over the decades a fairly accurate sense of which kind of looking he was receiving at any given moment. This was none of those. "What do you mean?" he asked. Eleanor Marsh considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "I watch films," she said. "Harold and I used to go every Friday evening for 40 years. We kept going after the children left and after the theater in town closed and we had to drive to Culpeper. Now I watch them at home." She looked back at the street. "There are actors who need you to know they're acting. Every scene, they're reminding you they're the one doing the thing. Look at what I'm carrying. Look at what it costs me. And then there are actors who disappear into it so completely that you forget to watch them and you start watching the story instead. The story becomes the thing, not the person telling it." She paused, choosing the next words with the care of someone who takes language seriously. "The second kind is rarer and harder to appreciate once you've learned the difference, because you can't stop seeing it." She was not looking at him. "There was a film," she continued, "about a country singer. I watched it 3 times. My daughter thought I'd lost my mind. But there was something in it, in the man who played the lead, that I couldn't finish thinking about. He wasn't performing sadness. He was sad, or something close enough to it that the difference didn't matter." Duvall was very still. "Tender Mercies," he said. Eleanor Marsh turned and looked at him. "You've seen it?" she said. "Yes," he said. She studied his face for a moment with the expression she had been wearing since she said he looked familiar, the expression of a woman trying to locate something she already knows but cannot quite place. "Max Sledge," she said slowly. "The character's name was Max Sledge." "Yes," Duvall said. Eleanor Marsh looked at him for a long moment, then she looked back at the street. "Well," she said quietly, "I've been sitting here talking to you about Harold and the drive home." "I didn't mind," Duvall said. "No," she said. "I don't suppose you did." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the thing about people who do what you do well. You actually listen. Most people are just waiting for their turn." She began the careful process of standing up from the bench, and Duvall stood with her in case she needed steadying, though she didn't. She picked up her canvas bag. She looked at him one more time, a full, direct look, the kind that takes its time. "You were sad in that film," she said. "The real kind. I don't know how you did it or what it cost you, but it was real, and it helped me when Harold died, more than I ever expected a film to help." She paused. "I just thought you should know that." She walked to her car, which was parked on the street 20 feet away, got in with the deliberate care she brought to most things, and drove her 11 miles home. Robert Duvall sat on the bench outside the hardware store on Main Street in Washington, Virginia, for a while after she left. The bench was still warm from the afternoon sun. Main Street was its ordinary Thursday self, a pickup pulling out of a parking space, a woman coming out of the post office, a dog sitting on the sidewalk across the street with the patient, philosophical expression of a dog that has been tied to a post and has made its peace with it. The world had not reorganized itself around what had just happened on this bench. Nothing was different. The street was the same street. The afternoon was the same afternoon. Something had happened on this bench. He sat with it for a while without trying to do anything with it. He had a small notebook in his shirt pocket, the kind he had carried for years for lines and ideas and things he didn't want to lose. He took it out. He wrote down what she had said. Not all of it. The last part. You were sad in that film. The real kind. I don't know how you did it or what it cost you, but it was real. And it helped me when Harold died, more than I ever expected a film to help. He sat with it for a moment. He thought about what it meant that the truest thing anyone had said to him about his work in years had been said by a woman who didn't know it was his work, who had watched the film alone after Harold died because she needed to be in the company of something sad enough to match what she was feeling, and had found it, and had carried it for 3 years without knowing that the man who made it lived 11 miles from her market and sometimes sat on the same bench on Thursday afternoons. He thought about that for a while. Then he drove home. He told the story once, years later, in a conversation with a journalist who had asked him what he believed the purpose of acting was. He had been quiet for a moment before answering, in the way he was quiet when he was deciding how much of what he actually thought to say out loud. The journalist had asked the question in the way journalists ask questions they expect a considered answer to, and Duvall had given them the long silence that preceded his considered answers, and the journalist had waited, which was the right thing to do. There was a woman on a bench, he said. She told me that something I had done had helped her when her husband died. She didn't know it was me when she told me. That's the only version of that conversation that matters, the one where she doesn't know. Because in that version, she wasn't giving me anything. She was just telling the truth. He paused. That's what it's for, he said. That's the whole answer. The notebook with her words in it is still at the farm in Rappahannock County, in a drawer in the room he uses as an office with the other notebooks from those years. He filled the rest of that one by the following spring. The entry from the Thursday in June is not marked or annotated. It sits between notes about a script he was reading and a phone number for someone in New Mexico whose name he could no longer recall. The notebook with her words in it is still at the farm. He wrote other things in it after that Thursday, and other things before it, and it sits in a drawer with the other notebooks from those years. He never told anyone her name. He didn't need to. The story doesn't need her name. It needs only what she said, and the fact that she didn't know who she was saying it to. That's the version that is complete. Every other version has something extra in it that the story doesn't need. Eleanor Marsh drove her 11 miles home on that Thursday in June, and in all likelihood did not think again about the man on the bench outside the hardware store. She had errands to finish and a farm to manage, and 11 miles of road she had driven for 53 years. The conversation had been pleasant. The afternoon had been lovely. That was sufficient. If this story reminded you that the truest things are almost always said to the wrong person at the right time, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. More stories about who these legends really were, in the ordinary moments between the extraordinary ones, are coming every single week.